Asato ma sadagamaya tamaso maham jyotirgamaya mrityormam amritam gamaya avir ahavir Maedhi Rudra Yatte Dakshinam Mukhaham Tena Maham Pahinityam. Om. Lead us from the real, unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So my subject this morning is how to help the world. And we're going to be talking about good works. Motivated, that is, works that are motivated by simple kindness, sympathy, compassion. We're going to be talking about the virtue of charity, the voluntary helping of others in need. And we're going to be talking about generosity and about widening our circle of care and talking about unselfishness and loosening our grasp on the separate self. All religions of the world teach us about the virtue of charity. And I remember, Sanskrit is called dana. And I remember long ago being seated in a small village in Thailand. And I was seated at a tea shop, having morning tea. It was very early, maybe 5:30 or 6. And at that time, the monks from the Thai forest tradition go on their begging rounds. And it seems like everyone in those early hours are sound asleep. But there comes through the streets, walking briskly, not looking to the left or the right, walk those 2, 3, 4 monks, holding their begging bowls. And lo and behold, out of it seems like everyone's asleep, but lo and behold, several doors open, and people come running out, bringing little handfuls of gifts. They have to stop the monks because part of one of the vows is not like the Indian sannyasins who go around and they do the madhu kari bhiksha, where you go from house to house and you beg from the householder for some alms. The Theravadan monks are not allowed to ask for anything. And so they actually have to rely on the householders coming and kind of chasing them down. Please stop, sir. Put something in their bowl. And then they go on their way. I sat there sipping my tea. I watched all this. And then I felt a little guilty. I thought, well, maybe I should do something. But by that time, these monks, they walked so briskly, they disappeared down the road. And, well, maybe it'd be good to be a little more charitable. I thought that would be a good virtue. And I remember a teaching, one of the Dharma talks of the Ajahns of the Theravada tradition. He told the old Buddhist story about the stingiest man alive. There was a man who was a householder, very prosperous. He had several businesses, and he had a loving wife and children. And he wanted for nothing really of material wealth or possessions. His problem was that he was so stingy. He never gave anything to anybody else. And he never gave anything to his wife. And she and the children often went hungry because he pinched pennies, didn't want to even feed his own children. And not only that, he was so stingy he wouldn't even give it to himself. And he was very unhappy. And he was miserable. And he was suffering. And some disciples of the Buddha, Lord Buddha, at that time, disciples went and pleaded with the Buddha, sir. He said, revered sir, please go and talk to this man. See if you can help him. And so he met with the man and gave him some good advice. He said, well, you see, virtue, as you know, students of Aristotle, virtue is something which it's a habit. It has to be cultivated. When they say charity is a virtue, it's not just a gift of God. Some virtues are, intellectual virtues and things are like gifts of God. It has to be cultivated. Lord Buddha gives some instruction. He said, why don't you have one handful of rice. He said, for the next week, I want you to practice taking a bowl of rice in your right hand and putting it into your left hand. And so that was his instructions. And he left, and the man, hearing about the Buddha, and he had confidence in his advice. So he tried that, very difficult for him the first days. Finally, after a whole week of practice, he was able to put a bowl of rice with his right hand into his left hand. Yeah. Then the Buddha returned. There are some further instructions. So we'd like you to take that one handful of rice, give it to your children. They're very hungry. Well, the first week he has to struggle. Little by little he learned to give that one handful of rice to his children and then to his wife. And then Buddha suggested that he give the handful of rice to a passerby. And he did. And so gradually he cultivated that habit, that virtue of charity. And later he became famous as one of the most generous of the disciples of the Lord Buddha. And so my mind gets confused here, and we're talking here about the virtue of charity. We're talking here about charity does not just mean, often it means a dana or almsgiving, but we know very well that there are saintly persons who exercise great generosity, helping and serving the poor, of sitting with the poor, of feeding the hungry, of giving blankets to the homeless, and food and shelter. And maybe the most famous story in the most famous parable, certainly, of in the Christian Bible is that of the Good Samaritan. And you remember how someone listening to the teachings of Jesus, hearing that you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself, asked, who is my neighbor? And Jesus told that wonderful parable about the man who one day went down journeyed down from Jerusalem to the city of Jericho, maybe not too far on the map, maybe like 20 miles, but having to go through a lot of rocky terrain and kind of desolate, the road winding its way through some barren land. And going through there, he was waylaid by highwaymen and robbers who beat him and who stripped him of his clothes and who left him there by the side of the road in a sorry condition. Well, there he lay, and time passed, and a priest came by that way, and the priest was looked over, saw the man, passed by on the other side of the road. He didn't want to become involved. Time passed, more time passed, and a Levite came by that way. Levite is something like a Jewish Brahmin. He also, thinking the man was like unclean, passed by on the other side of the road. And then there came by that way a Samaritan. And he stopped, seeing the man, moved by a feeling of sympathy, and not just sympathy, but compassion. That is, he felt moved to help him. Went over to the man and cleaned his wounds, tore his own cloths, wrapped his arm and his leg in the own cloth. Used in those days, they used to use wine to kind of disinfect the wounds. Poured a little wine on his wounds, had some oil there, rubbed his body with the oil. It didn't stop there. Put the man, loaded him up on his donkey, and there they go through, wending through along the road into the small village. And the Samaritan took him to an inn. And there in the inn, he instructed the innkeeper, please see to keep this man for a few days, give him whatever he wants of food and shelter. And then when I return, I'll pay you for whatever is needful. And so this was the parable of Jesus. And then he asked, of course, the disciple, which one of these men exemplified the virtue of loving and serving your neighbor as yourself. Certainly it was the Samaritan who helped the poor man, and his advice was, go and do likewise. So the Good Samaritan, he exemplified the virtue of charity. And, well, in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 17th chapter, There's a long discussion about charity. And the yoga psychologists were very interested in they distinguished there 3 different kinds or levels or grades of what's called dana or charity or good works. Sattvic, Rajasic, and Tamasic. Now I'm introducing here a few Sanskrit words, but they're very helpful Sanskrit words because they kind of give us a very helpful sort system that will enable us to categorize a lot of our thinking in many different domains. And in fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, they talk about different subjects in spiritual life. And in terms of these 3 categories, help us kind of to sort out our thinking. Now, the Good Samaritan, he kind of exemplifies the ideal of sattvic charity. Think of them as good, better, best. Sattvic charity, the very best. That is, he was moved by sympathy, moved by kindness. He was at the right time, the right place. There's a fitness of circumstances. And certainly he had no ulterior motive. Kind of pure selfless service. A generous act of helping your neighbor. Sattvic charity, it's called. There's another grade of charity, which is also good because it's unselfish. Unselfish. That kind of makes it, that puts it into the category of moral action. But the yogis who are fond of analyzing things, they're not content with the good. You see, they want to go the better and the best. So that's where they analyze. So a little bit below that charity is called Rajasic charity. Now, Rajasic charity is sometimes very dramatic because it's very generous. And but Rajasic charity also is sometimes impulsive. That is, it may be an act, a good act, but done with some not measured, not entirely rational, kind of an emotional response to the situation, and always welcoming maybe some public recognition. Rajasic charity. Less than those is the tamasic. Tamasic charity, good work, but done at the wrong time, the wrong place, the wrong circumstances, and often impulsive, unthinking, without foresight, and maybe even resulting in doing more harm than good. That's called tamasic charity. And I'll tell you a personal anecdote about tamasic charity. When we were working on the monks in our Vedanta retreat in Olima, Marin County, building the women's retreat house, we had to grade that building site. And I remember one day we were up there working with the Caterpillar bulldozers, working to grade the very dusty, dirty work. And be little breaks as one truck came and another one of the dozers went by. And in those breaks, at that time, my mind, you see, I get thinking about Vedanta paradoxes and problems, and I was thinking about, my mind would go to some, and I'd get some little insights, and I'd take some paper out of my pocket, write down those insights, put it back in my pocket. By that time, trucks come by, and we have to start work again. Somehow those breaks kind of stimulated my creativity. So I had a whole pocket full of precious insights, good notes. So the day over, we returned to the monastery. shed all those dirty work clothes. I left them in a pile by the washing machine. Went, showered, went into the shrine, meditated, and when I came out from the meditation, went over to the washing machine, and I saw that my pants and my shirt had been washed. Another brother in the monastery, he was a do-gooder. He had decided to help. He was going to help. And so he washed my clothes along with all of my notes, which were all blurred, completely lost during from that whole entire day. And I felt very vexed with him. Well, he meant well. And acting unselfishly, but kind of being a do-gooder, and do-gooder means is that you help. See, it's good to help others who can't help themselves, but to help people who don't need your help, who don't want your help, and to be unsuccessful even in doing that, that's tamasic charity. Now, in the Bhagavad Gita, the bottom of the line is, of course, that when we do for others, when we feel inspired to help others, by charity, helping those in need, of course, we want to be successful. In the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, you can read all about the pentagon of success. That is about how to be successful in the practice of good works. Being successful now means what? Reducing suffering, increasing happiness, increasing the well-being, how to help the world. How do you want to help? What does helping the world mean? It means what? It means reducing suffering, increasing happiness, the general welfare, the happiness of the many, the welfare of the many, increasing the level of well-being, the number of happiness units in the world, not decreasing them. That's what it means to be successful. And the Bhagavad Gita there talks about how to be successful. And they give 5 characteristics, which we're not going to discuss those 5, but just briefly, those 5 they focus on 5 different aspects of a karmic action that is the doer himself. That's number 1. Number 2 is the means of action. And number 3 is going to be the time, the place, the fitness of circumstances. Number 4 is going to be all about a discussion. You can read about this in the Gita, discussion about good effort, patience, purity, and perseverance. And finally, they talk about daiva, that is the X factor, things you can't control. First 4 you can control. The fifth you can't really control. These are the factors that enter into an action being successful. Let's just look here at the first one. First one is about focusing on the doer. If we want to do good works, we have to be good first. And Sanskrit word there is an adhikari. Adhikari means is that you have to be, these are prerequisites for the study, all different kinds of yoga. There are requirements. There are qualifications before you're allowed to begin the whole practice. That means that you're considered to be a fit disciple. And so here too, before you're fit, you're considered to be qualified really to help others. The ideal, if you want to be successful, is to be an adhikari. And I remember once that I in Berkeley, in our Berkeley Center. I told the Swami there, this was many years ago, he asked me, well, what is it that you want? Come here to spiritual life and interested in soul, God of religion. What is it that you want? And I remember I told him, I want to do good to the world. That's what I told him. And he said, he smiled. And he said, why don't you be good first? Be good first. And I thought, yeah, that's pretty good advice, you know, to be good first. See, at that time, in 1960, this is a few years before that, President Kennedy had began that federal program called the Peace Corps. And young people were signing up all over the country to go to foreign lands to help the poor and the downtrodden, the poor and the needy and the suffering of the world. We saw in the Berkeley long lines of hippies outside the Peace Corps office, ready to volunteer to go and to help the world, to serve the world. And of course, the first question that they're asked when you go to sit down there before in the office, the first question that they're asked is, well, what do you know how to do? What can you do? What are your skills? What is your training? And it's not enough just for your body to appear on the scene. There are many bodies there in these foreign lands. But what we need is skills. We need know-how. We need people who know how to do things and who can teach things. And so, although many applied, few were accepted. Why? Because they weren't Ardhikaris. They had good motivation. They had high idealism. But they didn't satisfy the first criterion here, the Bhagavad Gita, that is the qualifications of the doer himself be an adhikari. Now there in that interpretation, we're talking here about having the skill set necessary to do long-term, effective humanitarian service. And but there's more to that. There's more to the story, and that is the qualifications of the doer is not just to be an adhikari in the sense of having skills and knowledge and know-how, but to be a person of good character. That is, in order to do good, you have to be good. And you know how in ethics, the word good, it's kind of it's a shifting signifier here. It's kind of systematically ambiguous in different frameworks. But in the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, when it's talked there about the doer and the doer being good, what they really mean is not that you have a lot of skills and know-how. What they really mean is that you are a person of moral character. That is, that you are a person who is established. Not only do you have the virtue of charity, but that you have other virtues as well. You have all the virtues of the rationality, honesty, integrity, independence, justice, all of those virtues that are discussed in that are part of the Aryan code of morality, and discussed in great detail by Aristotle in the ancient Indian scriptures. And it's expected that you are established in virtue. And that's because the fact is that many people have noble aspirations. How to help the world, our subject. Many people have noble aspirations about how to help the world, how to save the world, how to save the planet. But the problem is that the world is a big place. And that sometimes, this is the worries, the worrisome tone that we get in the scriptures. Saints and sages remind us that the world is a big place and that sometimes environment is stronger than willpower. And that sometimes people go into the world in order to save the world, and before long it's they themselves who need to be saved and rescued. And so Swami Vivekananda liked to refer on occasion to the famous novel by Anatole France called Thais. And Thais was a courtesan who lived in Alexandria, ancient Egypt. And not too far from there, out in the desert, vastness is where there lived the desert fathers. And they just lived there in caves alone, doing austerities. One of those desert fathers, his name was Paphnutius. And Paphnutius, after many years of austerity and prayer and fasting, one day, seated alone in his cave, he had an inspiration. And that is that he would go out from his cave to help the world. And he thought in particular that of all the world to help, of course, he wanted to help. He would help the poor and the suffering. And he would bring to them the word of God. And so he went into the city of Alexandria, wended his way through the streets. And before long, one day, he knocked at the door of Thais, the courtesan. And there she opened the door. Oh, a great hermit. He's a great saint. She fell at his feet, and she began to learn the teachings, the Word of God. This is like 2nd century A.D. So she began to learn about the Word of God from the hermit. And as he taught her, gradually the story unfolds. She became better and better. Her character began to improve. She became more loving kindness. She became more and more spiritual. But along with that, as the story unfolds, Paphnutius, living in bad company, gradually yielded to temptations, and yielded to the temptations of the flesh, and gradually he fell from grace. He lost his sainthood, and he ended up as a poor, lost soul. So that's the story about what's the lesson. What's the lesson? Well, what's the lesson here is, of course, is that the first teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. If you want to be successful, be established in character first. And on one occasion, the famous writer F.H. Humphreys, he approached the Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi. Now, Ramana Maharshi, well, you all know the story about him. One day, Francis Humphreys approached him and asked him this question: how can I help the world? That was his question. And Bhagavan replied to him saying, help yourself and you will help the world. Help yourself and you will help the world. He didn't say help yourself and then go and help the world. He said help yourself and you will help the world. And what he means there, of course, is that help yourself means work on yourself, focus on yourself, and become a man of character. Develop moral character virtues. Grow yourself. And become more and more unselfish. You see, in Indian philosophy, unselfishness, these are all, in words we kind of have to walk around these words. Unselfish, being unselfish does not mean primarily helping others. Being unselfish means differentiating from your lower self and identifying with your higher self. And so what the Bhagavan is instructing him here, he's saying, be good first. Here he means, be unselfish means differentiate from your lower self, identify with your higher self, that is your Atman, your true self, and begin to exemplify into those virtues which are necessary. See, in order to realize your higher self, you have to embody certain character virtues, moral virtues. The virtues are what will enable you to realize your ideal. And therefore, what Bhagavan is saying there, be good, what he means there, he doesn't mean go out and help people. What he means there, in my interpretation, I'm giving you my Vedantic interpretation, what he means there is primarily to develop moral character, to focus on your own spiritual growth, to cultivate those qualities of moral character, honesty, integrity, independence, being true to yourself, which in Sanskrit is called dharma, which we've discussed on other occasions. Basically, what he's saying there is do your dharma. Do your dharma. And see, in America, we have many organized public charities and social welfare organizations. That's what America's famous for. Most charitable country in the world. All the money, where does it come from? It comes from American taxpayers, American donors who support these charitable organizations all over the world. But in old India, and we're not talking about modern India, we're talking about in old India, you didn't have these big public social service organizations. There wasn't any organized public charities such as we think of them today. And in Indian philosophy, the emphasis was always on personal ethics rather than social ethics. Personal ethics rather than social ethics. And the idea was that society is an abstraction, that society consists of nothing but the sum total of individuals. And therefore, if individuals are good, if individuals are virtuous, then society, that is the sum total, the collective, will be raised as a matter of course. And we've discussed this on other occasions about the Indian conception of God himself. God himself, in Indian philosophy, that is the God of Vedanta, is nothing but the sum total of everything. We can think of God as the cosmic man. And certainly in ancient Indian philosophy, they conceived of certainly the family of mankind, the whole of man, as a being like a body. We can think of a cosmic body. And that just as a body has arms and legs and hearts and internal organs, similarly it is in the sum total that is the family or the great body of humanity. That each individual is like an arm, is like a leg, like an organ. And if the arm were to ask what can I do in order to help the body? Well, just be a good arm. That's all. That's all you need to do. That's enough. Achieve excellence and perfection as an arm. Do exactly what you're destined by your internal, by your dharma, your swadhu, your swadharma. And if every organ and if every limb of the body did that, then what a wonderful body it would be. Everything would be functioning in harmony. Everything would work together. And thus there would benefit the whole of the organism. So, how to help the world? Well, the teaching of the teaching is, well, do your dharma. Become a good person. And there's so many benefits to doing such good works. Sarva, let me quote this here. Sarva shastra praneshu vyasasya vachanam dhruvam paropakaya punyaya papaya parapidanam. It's an old famous verse from the Vyasa. It says there in the verse Sarva Shastra Puraneshu, in all of the Shastras, in all of the Puranas and the scriptures and thousands of millions of books, there's one teaching that holds true in all time and place. And that is that doing good to others is virtue. That is, doing good to others virtue, there's punya. And doing harm to them is sin. So there are many merits that come to us from doing good works. That is punya. And as students of law of karma, you know about those. We can just mention here, first off, obviously, the first thing is that if you moved by any voluntary good work done to for the good of others, helps to makes us a better person. That's the first law of karma, that we become a better person. And certainly the second effect is that immediately, if we are successful, and if we embody these qualifications here that are described here in the Bhagavad Gita, if we're successful in doing our good work, then in fact we will make this world a better place to live. We'll improve, we'll raise the level, we'll reduce the amount of suffering. Lord Buddha says all is suffering. He says try to reduce suffering. Try to increase, the good. If the evil is suffering, then the good would be to increase suffering, increase happiness, increase goodness. Increase, if you don't like the idea of happiness, less suffering, and happiness and misery, we can use the old, the terms of Aristotle, that is general well-being, eudaimonia. Increasing the level of well-being, of human flourishing, trying to raise the standard of humankind. That's certainly a second benefit that comes out of doing good works. And the third benefit we know very well as students of the law of karma, that whenever you do something to help someone else, that karma, that's an act of karma, what goes around comes around. And that action sets in motion a chain reaction that will cycle around like a boomerang and will return to you in the form of good circumstances, whereby you will find that you can prosper and you can succeed in spiritual life. And so the good works benefit others directly, and they benefit yourself directly, and they benefit you indirectly. And so let me give you one final note. And that is that this morning we have been talking about the virtue of charity and good works and humanitarian service and social service. On other occasions, on other lectures, we have discussed a lot about the practice of karma yoga. Now, karma yoga and good works, they're related. It's kind of like you visualize the valley. You're down in the valley, you look up and you see the mountains. First thing you have to do, you get up out of the valley and you start climbing the mountains. It's all one process. And good works and karma yoga are often conflated. And but it's good maybe for us to keep a conceptual distinction between the two. Because certainly in doing good works, that is unselfish actions for the welfare of others, out of sympathy, out of compassion, motivated by a desire to help and to serve another. Certainly such works make the world a better place to live. And certainly such works purify your mind and heart. And certainly such works will work to refine, the law of karma, this will refine the iron chains, if you imagine the chains that bind us, the chains of the karma, links of the karmic vicious circle of karma, we're bound by those chains. This will help us to refine the iron chains into silver chains, into golden chains. But we have to remember that good works will not give us bhakti and mukti. In order to do that, We have to bring in something else. In order to achieve that spiritual goal, in order to move from moralism to spirituality, we have to bring God into the picture. We have to bring Ishvara into the picture. We have to bring the Atman into the picture. We have to bring high philosophy into the picture. That's what will be crucial for us to modulate up from doing serving man as man, humanitarian service, and serving God in man. That's the difference between service and what in Sanskrit is called seva. Seva is often translated as selfless service, and so it's easy to conflate the two. But that's karma yoga. Converting dharma to karma yoga. Foundation, development, it's a whole process, but it's helpful for us to keep them conceptually distinct in our minds. One is not the other. And so this morning we've discussed something, talked about doing good works. In some future talk we'll continue our discussion of karma yoga. Om Dyo Shantihi Antariksha Ham Shantihi Prithvi Shantihi Apa Shantihi Oshadaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantihi Vishwe Deva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Saravam Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Same Shantiredhi Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Om. Peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal, universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all.